Hello and welcome to another edition of Talking with Boss. I am Parrish Alford. This is John Pitts. We are with the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal here in Tupelo. We're talking football for the next 20 minutes, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and whatever else from the SEC comes to mind. John, thanks for being with us again today.
Sure.
What do you make of this Arkansas team, John? The Razorbacks coming to visit Ole Miss. We get a day game. The Rebels haven't had one yet this year. Get the 11-21 kick, so I'm pretty pumped about that. Arkansas comes in numerically challenged, really struggling, not scoring enough, giving up way too much. What do you make of the Hogs at this point? Are they as bad as their numbers make them look?
Well, I keep thinking back to the middle of September, I think before the loss to Rutgers, when people were trying to sell us on the idea that this was an improved Arkansas team. But this is basically about like last year, I think, in terms of where they stand at this point. And I would say it's a program in transition. And it's that kind of awkward transition that comes when a coach comes in and isn't so much interested in looking at the personnel and trying to adapt to the personnel as he comes in from Wisconsin with a style that they want to play, and they're going to adapt their personnel to the style, and results be damned until they get where they want to be. So that's how you get to be 0-5 in the conference, and not really competitive. I mean, it's arguable, I suppose, who would win in a Kentucky-Arkansas slugfest.
Now, you mentioned the style that Bret Bielema wants to play, and obviously it's very different than what Bobby Petrino built at Arkansas there, which, for years thrived under the style that Bret Bielema is trying to rebuild there. Thrived with the Houston Nutt run games and, some good backs, some good offensive lines there. But in speaking with some Arkansas beat writers and just trading notes during the week, it sounds to me like a lot of that talent at wide receiver that we saw with guys like, Jarius Wright and others through the years, that a lot of those guys had left the program. They were having attrition, and you would think that, this is only the second year without Bobby Petrino. You would think that some of that talent would still be there, that they would be a little more effective in the passing game, and that would be something that Bret Bielema could fall back on right now, even while he tries to build a different style. But guys tell me that talent just isn't there, except at running back, where Bielema was able to sell, hey, we're going to run the ball. You got a freshman like Alex Collins coming in. He's the number 4 rusher in the SEC right now. And for all of Arkansas's problems right now, they have been a team that can run the football. Now, obviously, that's been to a little bit lesser extent inside the conference than outside the conference. In SEC games, they're averaging about 183 yards a game, which is still pretty impressive. But they've been able to run the ball. They've been able to possess the ball and eat up clock. And I think the key here, when you look at Arkansas, is in conference play, their turnover margin is -12. I mean, that's staggering.
That's just in 5 games.
Yeah, in 5 games
That's almost Southern Miss-like.
Yeah, that you've fallen behind in turnovers to that level. And when I look at the Razorbacks and I consider the Ole Miss game coming up, one, I don't think if you're Hugh Freeze that you can write those turnovers into your game plan. You can't assume that those turnovers are going to happen. And two, I see an Arkansas team that, isn't mailing it in right now. They're still playing, as evidenced by their comeback against Auburn. You're down 28-3. You had been outscored in your previous 2 games 104-7. So down 28-3, it would have been pretty easy to just say, that's it, we're done, we'll just move on to the next game. But they closed it to 28-17. So it still looks like some effort.
Yeah, and that differentiates itself a little bit from last year. They will win a conference game, and they've just got 3 chances, but they will. I don't know which one. I presume it'll be Mississippi State because that's at Little Rock. And as our friend Robbie Robertson would say, man, it's tough to win, and tough to win over there because State's never won over there.
Right.
So that one I'm sure they have circled, but they're still giving effort, and if they can hang on to the ball, they might be dangerous. But I think the great fear would simply be taking them lightly in some fashion.
Well, I'll tell you what, most games for Ole Miss under Hugh Freeze, we've seen a team that has come out, I think, prepared. I don't think we've seen a trend of them being distracted or overlooking opponents. And the game that would closely resemble that, I think, would be Auburn earlier this year. And now every time Auburn steps on the field, that loss doesn't look quite as bad. But I think, that to me, the Auburn game at Auburn was the first game for Ole Miss under Hugh Freeze in which I thought they were thoroughly outplayed by a team on their level.
Right.
Auburn did some different things, did some things they had not shown on video to that point, but by and large, Ole Miss has come out ready to play. They weren't lackadaisical against Idaho 2 weeks ago when they clearly could have been, coming off the big LSU win. I think the key, an important factor for Ole Miss in this game is the fact that they're just healthier.
Right.
They were able to rest some people against Idaho. You follow that up with an open date, and against a team that wants to pound the ball and just run it and run it and run it, you're going to put Robert Nkemdiche back in the mix, and it looks like you're going to put him at tackle and not end. They like the play they've gotten out of Brian Bennett, the former defensive tackle, moving out to end. They think he plays harder there. They think that his athleticism is strong. He's able to make some plays and at the same time hold up in the run game. So I think it looks like it could be a pretty good run-stopping line there with Nkemdiche at tackle and Bennett at end. Cameron Wiggum comes back after a stinger injury. I like the personnel that the Rebels will have there in trying to slow down this Arkansas run game. John, I'd be interested to hear your take on Robert Nkemdiche. And he's been in 6 games. I mean, what do you make of his freshman season?
Small sample size, and a couple of people whose judgment I trust say that today they'd take Chris Jones of Mississippi State over Nkemdiche in terms of performance to this point. So again, he's certainly not been a liability. He is an impact player. He has to be accounted for on every play, and that creates opportunities for others. But, I think back healthy with 3-4 games to go here in the regular season, a chance for him to really seal his freshman resume with some impact play.
I think the opportunity is there. As you look at Robert Nkemdiche's numbers right here, he's been in 6 games. He started 5. The measurables, when you think of defensive impact players, just aren't there. For a guy who in high school made his living rushing off the edge, he doesn't have a sack. He does have a pressure. He's batted a couple of passes. Now, he hasn't played exclusively at end this year. He's played at tackle, and he's going to play some at tackle, almost 300 pounds right now, 6'5", 294. I like the matchup of Nkemdiche on the inside against an Arkansas line that is starting 2 freshmen at the guard spots. They're making a few mistakes, and if you make a mistake against a guy of that ability, you would think that you would pay for it. I like the matchup for Ole Miss of Nkemdiche inside there, but his performance this date, it's just kind of short on the measurables. Nothing that's going to make you jump up and say, wow, 19 tackles. But within that, John, I've seen the attention that he commands. I've seen the double teams, and I've seen him make some plays that don't show up in the box score. Going back to that first game against Vanderbilt, there was a 3rd down incomplete pass from Austin Carter-Samuels in which he chased the guy a long ways, chased him to the sideline, and he throws the ball out of bounds. That doesn't show up on Nkemdiche's stat sheet, but that's a big play.
Coming back from the injury he has, though, how much chasing sideline to sideline do you want to see him doing right now?
Right. You don't want.
Is that why you put him at tackle? Because you don't want him to feel like from the end that he's got to try to go sideline to sideline?
I think that's a twofold thing for Ole Miss. I think what you're talking about works out better with his hamstring, and I think they like the matchup of Nkemdiche against those guards. So I think that's a twofold benefit for Ole Miss. We'll see. I think the big question for Robert Nkemdiche going into this game is going to be conditioning. How long can you go? how hard can you go? All right, because the hamstring, that takes you away from conditioning. I mean, it's not like an elbow where you can do some running or you can get in the pool and do some things like that. The hamstring injury limits you in your conditioning, and you can lose that quickly, even in the middle of the season. Shifting gears a little bit, John. Mississippi State quarterback Dak Prescott lost his mother earlier in the week. Hugh Freeze reached out to him on Twitter, which I enjoyed seeing that. I like seeing the rivalry and the yang that goes along with it put to bed a little bit in times of loss.
Right.
But Prescott, it's unclear what his role will be, if he will even make the trip with Mississippi State to Texas A&M. What do you think happens there? Do you think he plays, and if he plays, does he play effectively?
I would expect that he might make the trip. If I was the coaching staff, I would not plan to start him, and I would keep him in reserve. I mean, I think this is a game where Russell should be able, Tyler Russell should be able to complete some passes and move the football some. So I suspect that's their intention to go with him because he's supposedly ready. So we'll see.
Yeah, and most people have been able to move the football and score against Texas A&M. They haven't been able, too many of them, have not been able to move the football and score enough. The Alabama teams did, Alabama and Auburn. Both of those games in College Station, by the way, so it's not necessarily the intimidation of the 12th man that has kept A&M opponents from success. It's been Johnny Manziel and that A&M offense. What do you see, John? I mean, we know that Manziel is going to get his. Okay,
Right.
You know that A&M offense with Mike Evans and Ben Molina, who I think is overlooked at running back. Those guys don't get a lot of opportunities with Manziel throwing the ball and putting the pressure on teams like they like to do. What do you think about the matchup? You hit on it a little bit, but Tyler Russell against this Texas A&M defense. Can Mississippi State move the ball and score and remain competitive?
I suspect they can move the ball and score, but they're not going to win a shootout with Texas A&M. Not in their place, not in Starkville, not anywhere. Not on the dark side of the moon are they going to win a shootout type game. Now, if the score could be kept in the 20s or 30s, maybe so, but I don't know about that. I think it's just hard to see this Mississippi State team winning a shootout with much of anybody, but especially Texas A&M, with the confidence that they have going back to last year that if they've got Manziel on the sideline, they can win a shootout.
What do you think about Mississippi State going to Little Rock? As Robbie would say, hard to win there. Can they? Can they beat this Arkansas team in Little Rock? Because if they can't, they've still got Alabama on the schedule. I mean, they could really be looking at the Egg Bowl for they've got to win 2 to get bowl eligible.
Right. They got to play a perfect game, and that includes a perfect game from the coaching staff, and that's been lacking this year.
So that's Mississippi State and Little Rock. John, for years it seemed like LSU and Alabama would be the game of the century, and now I guess it's the game of the weekend. I've seen Alabama most recently an 11-point favorite in Tuscaloosa. Why is it when we think of LSU and Alabama as the upper tier of the Western Division? We've seen Nick Saban profiled on 60 Minutes, but it's Alabama that we see more consistent. I mean, LSU is more likely to have some ebb and flow, and they're showing this year that they're missing all that talent from defense that went to the NFL after last year's team. Is it all about Nick Saban and the consistency there, or when we think of upper echelon SEC West teams, why is LSU prone to have more ebb and flow?
Well, they're idiosyncratic, aren't they? I think that's a Les Miles thing. Yeah. I think somewhere at the intersection of how they do their play calling and some of their odd quirks with clock management, we just have the sense that, just like the team that couldn't beat Alabama twice,
Yeah.
I sort of feel like Alabama's going to come into this with a sense of mission, because the talk nationally this week has been, well, they haven't really beaten anybody badly that was a good team. Sorry, Ole Miss. People are looking for cracks in the foundation, and a close game against an LSU team that's still kind of lightly regarded nationally would give some ammunition to people that want to try to argue for an Oregon-Baylor national championship game, or that Florida State should be in the mix over Alabama.
Well, you know what? Even when LSU was 5-7 a few years ago, they played Alabama pretty close that year. I think that was an overtime game in Baton Rouge. I mean, do you see LSU scoring enough? Do you see those LSU receivers?
This is an Alabama defensive unit that may be as good as any, I mean, statistically, and it seems like when they put their minds to it, as they have a couple of times lately, they can really put the clamps on people.
Well, they certainly are looking better than they did early on, which that's what you want to see in any team.
Right.
You know, you want to see improvement as the season goes along. It looks like that improvement really started with that Ole Miss game, 25-0 there in Tuscaloosa back in September. Vanderbilt and Florida, John, one of the benefits of the open date last week is I watched a lot of games on TV, and that Georgia-Florida game was pretty interesting there at the end. Another loss for Florida. Those guys are 4-4 right now. Is this the most meaningful Vanderbilt and Florida game that you can remember? I mean, gosh, I figure if you're Vanderbilt and you can beat Georgia, you got a shot with Florida too. The way that season is unfolding.
I just think this is Florida's. I think this is Muschamp's job here. I think if you lose to Vanderbilt at home, whatever the circumstances, that would be very difficult. I think he's deeply wounded at this point because they just simply have. In his whole tenure, this offense thing has been an issue, and it's really cost them this year. Their inability to have an offense that's complementary of what they're trying to do defensively. They don't have to have Texas A&M offense. They don't even have to have the Tim Tebow offense from the national championships, but they've got to have an offense that is complementary to the efforts they're making defensively.
And you've got to think that those players are in the state of Florida, and it doesn't matter.
They may be on the roster. That's the troubling possibility is that they're players on the roster, but that they just aren't using them right.
And that you're not only perhaps not evaluating in recruiting, but not evaluating what you do have.
It just may be that football has evolved right now to where the old Virginia Tech model of we're not going to turn the ball over, we're going to get you on special teams, we're going to play tough defense, that may just not be enough. May just not be enough.
Well, how do you think now with 2 losses for Florida, 2 for South? More than that. Where's Florida now?
4-4,
Okay.
3-3 in the league.
3-3.
3-3.
Yeah, 3-3 in the conference. Florida is out of the discussion.
Yep.
With 3 losses. Georgia is still there. South Carolina with 2, and Missouri obviously leading the way in the East. Now Missouri comes to Oxford, and they I believe they host Texas A&M. Can Missouri close the deal?
Yes. Missouri can close the deal. They've got to be playing with a high level of confidence. Again, this is a very wonderful coaching staff that they have. They come to Ole Miss, and then they have Texas A&M at home. I think they can close the deal. I mean, can't they close the deal at Kentucky?
Yeah,
more or less.
Well, I tell you, they've got a 1-game lead.
Well,
okay,
that's not enough.
They've only got a 1-game lead.
Just a 1-game lead.
And if you get into the tiebreaker scenarios now, Missouri beat Georgia. Missouri lost to South Carolina.
Right.
South Carolina lost to Georgia. So you get those tiebreakers in there, and I think this is going to go to the end. But I tell you what, Missouri, when they were winning in the Big 12 before last year, the 5-7 intro into the SEC, you would think of Missouri scoring a lot of points, and you would think of their offense that would put pressure on you with the run pass.
They got a good defense. They got a good defense. I mean, people who have watched them come back the next day and go, "Hey, wait, this is an SEC caliber defense."
Right. So anyway, an interesting finish there. The West. I have a hard time seeing anyone winning other than Alabama. But there's a race going on in the Eastern Division.
Won't that be a great Iron Bowl, though, if you're looking at Alabama, Auburn, if they went out to get there? And I mean, Auburn, Auburn could do it. Auburn, it's just there's just something magical about that rivalry, and it's super interesting, this fabulous turnaround that Auburn's been able to make.
Well, it will be fun to see that game relevant again.
Yes.
To not be a foregone conclusion, and honestly, Alabama has LSU this week, but you know, Auburn is probably still the most threatening team on their schedule.
Nick Saban is happy, though, that this game is not at home, this Iron Bowl. He would prefer, I believe, I have a working theory, that he'd prefer road games simply because they can manage the setting, they can manage the environment better if it's on the road. He can micromanage all of it. The significant losses that they've had the last 3 or 4 years have been at home.
Yeah, Texas A&M, LSU a couple of years ago. Yeah.
An Auburn game, yeah.
that's
So
right.
I don't think he's upset at all that this is a road game.
John, good stuff, man. Thanks for being with us.
Always a pleasure.